Johnny Depp stood there, his hands casually tucked into his pockets, waiting for the employee to notice him. The soft chime of a bell sounded as he walked into the store, but the employee, a young woman in her mid-20s, was too engrossed in arranging some delicate necklaces on the display to pay him any attention. Depp had learned to appreciate moments like this, when he wasn't bombarded with fans or asked for autographs. Today, he was just a regular customer, in search of something beautiful to add to his ever-growing collection of unique jewelry. He cleared his throat gently, making sure to catch the employee's attention without startling her. Still, she didn't seem to notice. Her hands moved deftly, arranging the pieces as if he weren't there at all. Johnny smiled to himself, a small, amused grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. He took a step closer and spoke up, his voice calm and steady. "Excuse me," he said, leaning in slightly. "Do you have anything a little more unusual? Something unique?" The employee looked up, her brow furrowing for a moment, clearly surprised to see the man standing before her. She took in his unassuming appearance, sunglasses, leather jacket, and casual jeans, and didn't quite connect the dots. "Sorry, I didn't catch that," she replied, her tone polite but distracted as she started fiddling with a necklace. "Can you be more specific?" Johnny tilted his head slightly, his voice low and nonchalant. "Something that stands out, one of a kind." She paused, her eyes scanning the store shelves for something out of the ordinary. She looked at Johnny once more, still not quite understanding the gravity of who he was. "All right, let me check in the back. We get some more distinctive pieces there." She smiled at him, turning to walk toward the stockroom. Johnny stood there, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. He loved moments like this, when he could slip into the background unnoticed. It was a rare occurrence for a man like him, and for a brief moment, he could just be. As the employee disappeared into the back, Johnny allowed himself to take a few seconds to appreciate the quiet of the moment. He had made his name in the public. But sometimes it was the times when no one recognized him that he valued the most. The employee returned with a small tray of jewelry, placing it on the counter with a slightly exaggerated gesture. She glanced at Johnny, her eyes flicking over him with a mix of indifference and impatience, waiting for him to make up his mind. "Here," she said, still not recognizing who he was. "These are a bit more unique, though I don't know if they'll be to your taste. Most people tend to gravitate toward the simpler designs anyway." Johnny glanced down at the tray, his eyes scanning the pieces. They were indeed beautiful, but his expression remained unreadable, just a slight twitch of a smile tugging at his lips. He picked up a ring, a large, intricate design that caught the light, casting a subtle glow. He didn't rush to comment, instead letting the silence grow between them. The employee, thinking that Johnny was hesitant because of the price or the pieces themselves, couldn't help but offer a more pointed critique. "We usually recommend something a little more sophisticated for people with real taste," she added, her tone dripping with superiority. "But if you're going for something flashy, I guess this will do." Johnny's eyes flicked up to meet hers for the first time directly, the amusement in his expression now replaced with a quiet intensity. The atmosphere shifted ever so slightly, as if a veil had been lifted. "Flashy?" he repeated in a voice that was barely more than a whisper. "You think I'm looking for something flashy?" The employee, not fully grasping the situation, shrugged nonchalantly, still not connecting the dots. "Well, yeah. It's obvious when people don't know what they're looking for. You're kind of blending in with the crowd." Johnny took a deep breath, his voice now low and steady, almost as if he was savoring the moment. "You're right," he said, slowly setting the ring back down. "I'm blending in with the crowd, but not because of the jewelry. It's because I'm choosing not to stand out until I decide it's the right time." The employee blinked, clearly confused by his sudden shift in demeanor. Johnny's gaze never wavered, and for a moment, the tension between them was palpable. "I'm sorry," she said after a beat. her tone starting to soften slightly, unsure of how to proceed. "I didn't mean to offend you. I just thought you were—" Johnny interrupted her gently, a hint of amusement returning to his eyes. "No harm done, but maybe, just maybe, you might want to look a little closer next time. Some people are better at blending in than you think." He turned and began walking toward the door, leaving the employee staring after him in confusion. It wasn't until she saw him step outside and the sunlight caught his profile that she realized just who she had been speaking to. Johnny Depp, the man who had stood there, calm and unassuming, was not just any customer. He was a star, a legendary actor whose every move, every appearance was carefully watched by millions. The realization hit her like a freight train. She felt a mix of embarrassment and disbelief, but as the bell above the door chimed and Johnny disappeared into the street, she couldn't help but feel that maybe she had just learned a lesson, one that didn't come from the jewelry he was looking at, but from the man himself. The manager, sensing the tension, smiled warmly at Johnny Depp and gestured toward a glass display case at the far end of the store. "We just received a new collection that I think you'll really enjoy. It's truly one of a kind." Johnny nodded, giving the manager a polite smile as he followed him to the case. The employee stood frozen, her face still pale, unable to tear her eyes away from the actor. Her stomach churned with a mix of embarrassment and guilt, realizing the magnitude of her mistake. She had been dismissive, assuming he was just another customer, until she learned who he truly was. Johnny glanced over his shoulder briefly, catching her eye for just a moment. There was no anger in his gaze, no sign of resentment, just a calm, knowing look that left her feeling even more uneasy. The manager continued speaking with Johnny, but the employee couldn't focus on anything but the regret swelling in her chest. She had misjudged him, treating him like any other person who didn't deserve respect, only to discover she had been standing in front of one of Hollywood's greatest stars. The realization was sinking in, and she couldn't shake the thought that she had just sabotaged her own reputation, not only by mocking someone who could easily afford anything in the store, but by failing to recognize that every person deserves kindness and respect, no matter who they are. She had allowed her arrogance and assumptions to cloud her judgment, and it had cost her. Johnny Depp continued to browse the pieces, unaffected by the previous exchange. His cool, collected nature was unbothered by the interaction, as though he had long since learned how to handle moments like these. He admired a few items before turning to the manager and politely declining. "No, I think I'll pass on these today, but I appreciate your time. I'll be back soon." The manager nodded in understanding and began preparing to wrap up. Johnny walked towards the door, his every movement calm and composed, the atmosphere around him almost serene in its contrast to the chaos unfolding in the employee's mind.